uncertain times as we begin our transition out of winter-spring recharge season and begin to think about convective summer rainfall. Jeff, Chris, and I will discuss these changes and what we might expect in the near future in today's edition of the Water Resources Outlook. The first graphic we'll take a peek at is the past 30-day rainfall totals, and I wanted to show the rainfall totals because I want to kind of to get a feel for what we saw during that time and then how it compares to normal. And as you can see, the area that saw the most rainfall or the heaviest rainfall is in that Mississippi, Alabama area, all the way through the coastal Carolinas, and even some in along the Gulf Coast. However, as we look at the departure from normal, you'll see that even though we got heavier rain along the Gulf Coast, we expect a lot of rain during this time of year, especially during the month of March, and we really didn't receive as much as we normally do for this time of year. However, in that Alabama and Mississippi area where it was highlighted just a moment ago, we did see above normal precipitation, and again as we go into the coastal Carolina areas, we'll also see above normal. But again, below normal through much of Alabama, through much of Georgia, and up along the mountains of the Carolinas.
So we are past the peak of the primary recharge and river flood season for the southeast region. So let's take a look at our early January stream flow forecast and see how we did as we end the month of March here. So the forecast showed near normal across most of the region except that section down there in South Georgia and North Florida, roughly the Suwannee watershed and the Ocklawaha watershed. And as you can see, the forecast was not too bad, mostly normal across the southeast region in January, with some dryness in February, and again near normal across most of the region in March. So the lower Suwannee was high through February, which we had in the forecast. The Florida Peninsula was a bit more above normal than the forecast was showing, but so overall not too bad considering the wavering that we had in the ENSO conditions between neutral and weak El Nino conditions. So let's talk more on the wavering between neutral and weak El Nino, and let's look back at the stream flow analogs we showed back in the winter. The actual stream flows matched up better with the weak El Nino analogs versus the neutral as seen here. We can see the January El Nino analog had the Florida Peninsula with much higher stream flows, whereas the neutral case had lower stream flows across the peninsula and higher stream flows than the North Carolina area, which did not occur as much. Looking into February, we see the weak El Nino analogs had stream flows falling off from their January flows, which was evident in the observed flows. The analogs still showed highest chances for above normal stream flows in the Florida Peninsula, which is also what we observed. As you can see, the February analogs for weak El Nino did pretty darn good overall. The neutral analog, not so much. And finally, the March so far, we see a continued weak El Nino doing slightly better than the neutral analog and matching the observed long-term stream flows.
Okay, thanks for that, Jeff. Now, we've been pretty active lately. Let's take a look at what we can expect for the next several days. We're going to be starting the period on Friday with a trough moving across the area. And by daytime Friday, most of this precipitation should be across the coastal Carolinas and down into Florida. Behind this system, we're going to have high pressure moving in. That'll keep us dry for most of the weekend. However, as we get into Monday, we're going to have another trough and associated cold front moving across the area, bringing more precipitation to the southeast. As we get past Monday, it looks like we're getting into another unsettled weather pattern, but the details are still in flux out at this range. So it looks like the models are indicating that later in the week we should have another system coming in, but model run to model run, the details have been varying. So I didn't want to make another slide for that at this time. I think once we get past this event on Friday, the models should start to come into more agreement. Looking out into the long term, things are more uncertain still, but this time of year, the polar jet stream tends to be moving further north, and that's the polar air retreats northward for the season. So with the GFS showing another trough out at this range, we can expect to see near normal conditions across much of the area, but across the northern portion of the area, there's a chance that we could see above normal precipitation amounts.
Thank you, Chris. And yeah, there is some uncertainty in the models because we're in between seasons. It's a transitional time, so we would expect to see that during this time of year. So Jeff, why don't you talk a little bit about our forecast from the climatology perspective?
Okay, let's go back and talk about analogs again. So what does April look like for the weak El Nino and neutral when we talk about the analogs you see here? The weak El Nino favors continued above normal stream flows in Florida, with maybe some hint of below normal in the Tombigbee and parts of Mississippi you see there, whereas the neutral analog shows the best chances for below normal flows across the Florida Peninsula, with above normal in the Florida Panhandle and parts of South Georgia. So we would favor, and I think you agree, Todd, we sort of favor the weak El Nino analog, especially considering the latest ENSO forecast that you will be talking about here shortly. This would favor above normal stream flows across the state of Florida and near normal elsewhere. Keep in mind that stream flows are typically low in Florida, especially the peninsula, during April, and so the greatest flood threat will probably more likely be in the Panhandle. So overall, we see the river flood threat drop off fairly quickly across the southeast as we go into mid-April, as the southeast sees the vegetation green up and a general drop-off in precipitation for the most part during the month relative to other months.
And so now we look at the CPC outlook, which follows along very closely with what Jeff just talked about. Their April outlook is showing above normal chances over much of the Florida Peninsula and much of the southern tier of the southeast. They also are looking at probably a weak El Nino solution for this forecast. And so, as has been mentioned already, here is the ENSO model plume for the coming year. And as you can see, as opposed to what it's looked like before, where it looked like we were going into neutral conditions, after last month it does look like we are creeping into an ENSO, out of ENSO neutral and into El Nino conditions. It'll be weak El Nino, but it looks like it will continue through the rest of the spring and into the summer. And that's why we give the April forecast as much credence as we do. That's why we have a little more confidence in that April rainfall forecast. As for the 2015 U.S. spring flood outlook, this is the national outlook, and as you can see, that hatched area that we had talked about a little bit, the black that I showed earlier, that's where we're expecting the best chances for flood can happen at any time of year. So look for that and be prepared for that, and make sure you stay tuned to the Southeast RFC's both HVA and the daily operational support message if we get into that kind of situation. As for the April through June time period, it does look like above normal rainfall. Again, that follows along with our ENSO conditions and looking for the weak El Nino during that time. Again, this is a dry time of year for us, so it may not cause very many problems, but it might benefit the area to have a little bit more rain as we go into summer and keep our reservoirs full and keep stream flows in good condition before we start to get into the hot summer. So the bottom line, in the short term, there is still much uncertainty in the forecast, which is typical during this transitional time of year. We will expect probably pretty close to normal rainfall through the rest of March, and as we go into April, as with the CPC forecast and Jeff's analogs, it looks like with the weak El Nino being there, it looks like we'll be wetter than normal. But it is a relatively dry time for the Southeast through that April-May time frame as we go into the summer season. So we'll be watching that real closely to see how we transition and to see what it looks like once we get into that summer season. Our next Water Resources Outlook will be recorded the week of April 13th. Thank you for listening. If you have any questions or want to get with any of us about some of the things we talked about today, you can email Chris, Jeff, or I whenever you would like. Thanks for listening again.